Welcome to this week's episode of Going Rogue with Lara Logan. We have a fabulous guest today that is going to take us back in time to help us understand exactly where we are today in terms of immigration, Marxism, and much of what we're seeing around us in the United States of America, Jim Simpson. But first, a word from our sponsors. This show is sponsored by the wonderful company GiveSendGo. 10 years ago, GiveSendGo was founded with a very simple but powerful idea by a great couple, actually, brother and sister. I know Heather from GiveSendGo, and she is a fabulous woman. So they created a platform where people could easily and safely and confidently raise money for the causes that matter most to them. They saw what was happening, people being shut down, and they didn't like it. And they knew that money, it can only go so far to meet people's needs. So they turned crowdfunding into a bridge to share the hope of Jesus, hope that brings comfort and prayer to the grieving, peace in the midst of uncertainty, and courage in the face of fear. GiveSendGo has woven prayer into everything it does because they believe prayer truly changes things. So much so that it is the only crowdfunding platform in the world with a pray button and a dedicated hope team. So the pray button, what does that do? Well, it lets people, all kinds of people send and receive prayers right on every campaign page, while the hope team personally calls to pray for every single campaign, reminding people that they are seen, they are loved, and they are never alone. Today, GiveSendGo stands as a symbol of faith and freedom, empowering people to live out that same mission of sharing hope and stepping in to make a difference. So if you see someone in need, or you want to rally support for a cause that is close to your heart, visit GiveSendGo.com/Lara and start a campaign today. And you can use our special coupon code Lara 2025. That's LARA 2025 for reduced fees and receive even more of what you raise. So here's the link again. It is GiveSendGo.com/Lara, where help and hope go hand in hand. Welcome back to the program. Okay, our guest today is someone I have known for a number of years now. He caught my attention with his written work as an author, and some of your film work, Jim, because you've been in a couple of films along with the great Trevor Loudon. You are one of the early voices, Jim Simpson, in figuring out how mass migration was being used as a tool of Marxists and communists to invade the United States of America and Western countries around the world. It's and then, of course, how Islamic immigration has been used as a cover by the Marxists, which led right to one of your more recent books over the last few years, the red-green axis and how to understand it. I have now added to that, I'm sure I'm not the only one, other people too have added the red-green-blue axis to that, to include the globalists, and how we're being played and how these forces around us really work. You have an extraordinary body of work. I will say you really deserve the credit for figuring this out, not years, but decades before the rest of us. And you also have a new book out. I mean, after the books about the red-green axis, you had your Karl Marx books, Marx Explained, and now you have your new book, which is called, remind me please?
Manufactured Crisis, The War to End America.
That's right. Manufactured Crisis, the War to End America, which is really about what you see as an existential crisis that we are facing. So you are someone who has an expertise in immigration, something you've looked at for a very long time. Marxism, though, has been a cornerstone of your studies. But your background, interestingly, is in economics and budgets. And you worked in government, starting in the Reagan administration, I believe, in economic policy, Office of Economic Policy, all the way through Bush 1 and into 6 months into the Clinton administration. You ended, I think, in OMB, right, the Office of Management and Budgets. So basically, you've been on the economic policy side, but you've also been on the side of seeing how the budgets are constructed, how they're made. I know you were part of the budgets for the Association of ATF, tobacco and firearms, right? So working on the inside of government until I think you said to me you couldn't take it anymore, and went into doing your own thing, running your own business, but also most importantly for the rest of us, taking your knowledge and experience, applying it to what you were seeing around you, which resulted in your first book. So can you explain, Jim, how you see where we are today, especially in light of the election of the first openly Democrat, socialist, Islamic jihadist mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani?
Mamdani, yeah. Zohran Mamdani. Well, it's very interesting because we've been hearing a lot in the news lately about the Red-Green Alliance, they call it. And, it's taken from the Red-Green Axis, the two books that I wrote on it. But it's really not so much an alliance as it is the communists using the Islamic radicals and frankly, the Muslim Brotherhood and the entire Islamic movement, the entire radical Islamic movement, including Islamic terrorism. They've been using them as cutouts for continued war against the West with plausible deniability. And people don't get that part. Now, it's absolutely true that, the Islamists that want to see Sharia law imposed in the United States and elsewhere in the West, many of them are very serious about that. But a lot of the leaders, and I include Zohran Mamdani in that category, are actually communists, and they're using Islamism as a cover, just as when we began allowing Muslim immigration, the Russians, the Soviets, saw that as a great opportunity to infiltrate a group of people who could challenge our culture under the First Amendment, freedom of religion. And so they slid in that way, but it's not really a religion. It is a tyrannical form of government that has a so-called religion as part of it. And the religion.
Well, Jim, just to interrupt you there for a moment.
Yeah.
Speaking to jihadists and Islamists over the years, one of the questions that I had put to me as a very young reporter in England, actually more than 20 years ago, in a mosque, was, what do you know about Islam? And I had the same question posed to me on the streets of Birmingham when I was out reporting, and they laughed at me when I began, because the first words out of my mouth were, Islam is a religion that. And they were like, yeah, you're wrong. You know nothing. And they were right. I got an education, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because what they told me is Islam is a civilization. It's not a religion, but we persist in the United States as treating it like a religion, and that affords it then the protections of the First Amendment, which is what you're talking about, right? While the global financial elite has been secretly accumulating wealth through cryptocurrency, ordinary Americans have been systematically excluded. And today I want to tell you about Block Trust IRA, because they're bringing crypto wealth to everyday people. And how are they doing it? Well, they're using advanced AI technology, which breaks the stranglehold of hidden powers who control our financial system. I've partnered with Block Trust IRA because I believe there's an intentional barrier between regular people and financial independence. And it's created by those who don't want to share what you're entitled to. Block Trust IRA has a very powerful trading platform, and it's called Animus AI. And it works 24/7, analyzing market data and executing advanced crypto strategies beyond the simple buy and hold. So what does it do? It exposes the lie that regular people like us should just sit and hold, while hedge fund elites trade with sophisticated algorithms. That's why this system was named the #1 crypto technology platform by Bitcoin Magazine, beating over 1,500 global competitors. So whether you're a teacher or a truck driver or a small business owner, or maybe you're just a retiree watching manipulated markets erode your 401k, Block Trust IRA's Animus AI arms you with the same tools that insiders use against financial tyranny. Clients are seeing over 250% returns on their investments, and they're protected by military-grade security and up to $200 million in insurance against interference. So don't wait. Visit LaraLoganCrypto.com to join the financial revolution that's fighting back against the hidden powers, keeping you dependent on their failing system. For a limited time, they're offering viewers up to $2,500 in bonus crypto when you open an account. Crypto created 80,000 new millionaires just last year. So why not you? Visit LaraLoganCrypto.com. That's LaraLoganCrypto.com for financial freedom.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And, the fact is that from 1917 forward, when Lenin's Bolsheviks took over in the Soviet Union, created the first communist state, he was cultivating a relationship with leaders, Muslim leaders, because there were a lot of them in what was then Soviet Russia and all these other places. And he recognized that they could become very useful. So he created what were originally Muslims of communist origin, meaning they were Muslims that came from these now communist subdivisions of the Soviet Union, into communists of Muslim origin, and so many of those leaders fall into that category.
Like who, Jim? Can you give examples?
Oh, yeah, lots. All of the imams in Iran went to the Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, Patrice Lumumba being an African leader, right, from Tanzania, former leader of Tanzania, who they love to hold up as an example. So it wasn't just in the Islamic world, it was in the African world, it was across Latin America as well.
Yeah.
Right, and even in Europe.
Yes, but the point was they went to Moscow University to learn about how Moscow saw things and how they were supposed to do things. And Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda's number 2, was a Soviet KGB agent. According to Alexander Litvinenko, the KGB defector who was poisoned in 2006 by polonium-210 by Soviet agents. You remember that fiasco.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his...
And who do you think was behind that poisoning?
Oh, that was Putin. Yeah, that was Putin. That was absolutely the Soviets.
And that was because he was talking.
That's because he was talking. Well, he said a bunch of other embarrassing things too, like about a film he had of Putin having engaged in sex with an underage boy. And that really, really bugged Putin. But the big one was...
But did anyone ever see that film?
That's a good question. I don't know. I certainly haven't. But the big allegation was that Ayman al-Zawahiri was a KGB agent. And,
has that been corroborated by anybody ever?
No, not that I know of.
And of course, we can't ask him because he's dead.
We can't ask him because he's dead. But, that's the way they operate. And I have no doubt that the Soviets knew, the Russians, whatever you want to call them, knew that 9/11 was going to happen well before it happened, because they have agents everywhere and they know what's going on all the time. And the Muslim Brotherhood has been under their thumb since after World War II. They provided arms, they provided training, they provided intelligence, and then they basically took the dogs off the leash and let them run wild.
So So when did they do that? And when you say they, who do you
I mean
mean
the Russians, I
specifically?
mean the Soviets.
So the Soviets were training who after the Second World War?
Oh, after the Second World War, they were training everybody. They were training the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. They were training the Red Brigades of Germany. They were training the, I forget what the name of the militant red group in Italy was. They were training the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists. They were training everybody at camps in Lebanon, Syria, and I believe one in Central South America somewhere.
Well, part of what you're talking about is how Lenin sent his emissaries all over the world, right, to identify fissures in their society. So in the United States, they identified the race issue. In Algeria, for example, they identified Islam because Islam wasn't endemic to the African tribes there, but there was an Islamic presence, and so that was heavily exploited to get the French out, right? Because Algeria was a French colony.
Absolutely.
And so the Soviets have been very good at identifying any of these openings in society and then exploiting them.
Yep.
But, Jim, what about the fall of the Soviet Union?
Ha. Well, that was what I was coming to. And as you say, as you notice, I keep calling it the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union never really fell. It was actually what Georgy Arbatov said was their biggest secret weapon: to deny your enemy an enemy. And that comes right out of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which was the Soviet primary military manual that all their leaders had to read. You know, our leaders have to read Clausewitz and other, more traditional
They also read
military.
Sun Tzu, a lot of our military.
Well, some do, yes.
Yeah.
That's become more so recently. But right from the beginning, that was how the Soviets have operated. You know, it's a whole thing is a deception campaign. And it was planned for decades. We had one of the few genuine defectors who came to the United States from the Soviet Union was a guy named Anatoly Golitsyn. And in 1984, he published a book titled New Lies for Old, where he predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall. He predicted the emergence of controlled, quote, controlled democracies throughout Eastern Europe and the collapse of communism. Now, I knew right from the beginning, well, I knew before I read that book that's what they were doing. Ian Pacipa, who was also a defector, a Romanian intelligence chief, wrote a book called Disinformation, where he talked about how the Romanian opening to the West, where, we started buying their wines and they started, partying and acting like they were all friendly. That was their dry run for the fall of the Soviet Union, because the idea was, and is perfect after studying American psychology for decades, which is what they've done, they couldn't have thought of a better plan. They announced all of a sudden that they were broke, that communism no longer worked, and the Soviet Union collapsed due to its own weight. Well, that's not true at all. The Soviet Union, the economy of the Soviet Union, collapsed of its own weight within the first few months of it being implemented in 1917. And it wasn't until 1921 when Lenin created Operation Trust and the new economic policy, which was the overt part of that counterintelligence campaign, that they began to get money. And ever since then, the dirty secret of all communist countries is that they've lived as parasites on the West. They lived because we've loaned them money, because we have given them, Ford gave them a Ford plant. We've given them many things. We've loaned them money. And when they have to pay for things, they use hard currency, i.e. gold and other resources that they have in plentiful amounts. But as for their economy, it collapsed right from the beginning. And then what sprung up in its place was, guess what? A free market economy. Although in the Soviet Union, it was what we call the black market. And it was run by the KGB. And so when they claimed that the Soviet Union fell, Republicans said, see, Reagan was right. We outspent them and they couldn't handle it. They couldn't take all that spending and it overwhelmed them. They collapsed. See, we, the Republicans, were right. And the Democrats said, see, we, the Democrats, were right. See, they were never that dangerous in the first place. So both sides declared themselves the winner and went home and forgot about it. And then immediately began drawing down our military under H.W. Bush that continued under Clinton to the point where when we engaged in the Iraq War in 2003, we needed to hire a group like Blackwater to train up. I think he trained up like something like 100,000 soldiers to fight because we only had 3 ready divisions by that point. And so we had completely given up. And the truth of the matter is that the way the lie is exposed, the tell, is that you look around the world and what happened to the various anti-communist revolutions going on, like, for example, Angola. Jonas Savimbi was fighting the Angolan communists who were being aided by 20,000 Cuban troops. And Jonas Savimbi was being supported by the United States. Well, as soon as the Soviet Union declared itself dead, we just dumped them and left them.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I was on the ground in Angola and I was with Savimbi's forces. And I actually remember the day that it was announced. I was getting into the shower. I was in Zimbabwe at the time. And I remember hearing over the radio that both Savimbi and his deputy, General Dembo, who I knew personally, had both been assassinated. And it was pretty obvious, that they didn't do that on their own. They had help. They had help doing that. So Angola, was, collapsed, but it wasn't just Angola. I mean,
it was all over the world.
It was all over. It was South Africa too. It was South Africa, and it was also in Mozambique, and it was in many other African countries because the world had been forced to choose between the United States and the Soviet Union. They forced all these other countries to pick a side. Yep. And so there were implications that rippled. There were second, third, fourth order effects that rippled all across the world when the Union collapsed and the wall came down. But Jim, I do want to know what those other 2 effects are that you want to talk about, but I don't want to leave it, sort of just let it sort of pass, because it's a big claim to make that this, that the fall of this and the collapse of the Soviet Union was orchestrated. It wasn't real. It was orchestrated. It was part of a broader plan. And then at the same time, to say that the U.S. had given up, I know there'd be a lot of people that would push back against that. Certainly, Blackwater was brought in for a lot of different reasons, one of which was massive economies of scale, because I went through their budgets when I was a reporter at 60 Minutes, and they were able to train and do things for a fraction of what the U.S. government was paying other people. And that's always left out of the narrative because people want to hate Blackwater. But, there's an economic reality to that. However, I think your broader point here is what you're saying is people stopped looking at Marxism and communism as a real threat. Yes. We took our eye off the ball. Exactly. We thought we'd won the war. So everybody was like, was doing a victory lap, on both sides of the aisle. And what we've now learned since then, because we have the evidence right in front of us, is that the United States of America continues to be assaulted every single day from outside and from within by Marxist communist elements that have been able to gain ground since the collapse of the Soviet Union because we took our eye off the ball. Right now, somewhere in Nigeria, there's a Christian family being persecuted. Those who are not killed are often forced to flee their homes. At Equipping the Persecuted, they're committed to reaching every affected area and help heal the deep physical and emotional wounds that have been inflicted upon them. But they can't help them without your support. So please visit equippingthepersecuted.org and donate today. Sign up for just $35 a month. It's a little over $1 a day, and you'll help rescue Christians who are suffering and provide security, medical care, food, shelter, and love. The situation is urgent, so I'm asking you to join in the next 10 minutes. It's a life of fear and danger for these Christians, but for just over $1 a day, you can change everything. Go online to equippingthepersecuted.org and make a difference in the life of a persecuted Christian. That's www.equippingthepersecuted.org. Exactly. Communism is dead. Long live communism. Yeah. And that's, as you say, that's true all over the world. We didn't see a fall of communism in Cuba or anywhere else. No. We saw a resurgence. And in fact, I was, giving budgets for ATF and Customs and Secret Service when I was working at the White House OMB. And I would ask them, so since the fall of the Soviet Union, has foreign KGB activity in the United States increased or decreased? They said, oh, it's gone way up. It's gone way up because they had the opportunity, because we haven't paid attention. And there's so many ways it defies description how many ways we have taken our eyes completely off the ball and made ourselves very, very vulnerable to these people. And I still call the Soviet Union because it essentially still is. Now you have the Eastern European countries that were liberated. They certainly do not want to be part of the Soviet Union. They don't want that. But there are still many communists in each of those countries that rule quietly from below. And so, for example, in Poland, when you had all of the Polish leaders really blatantly defying Moscow, they were all ordered to get on a single plane and fly to Moscow, even though they had originally intended to take two planes. And that plane was shot down and they were all killed. You remember that one, right? Yes, but Jim, I would ask you today, right? And I know, I understand the concept, because even with the Nazis, we have a similar scenario, right? You have the Nazis going all over the world to Islamic countries and others. You have them bringing the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was an Arab Islamist. They brought him to Berlin, made him an honorary Aryan before the Second World War. So you have a similar strategy between the fascists, the National Socialists, right, who are in a sense Marxists, but who are branded as fascists to make people think it's the other side, but it's the same coin. Right. And then following the war, you have the revelations of Operation Paperclip and the Finders documents, which show that even though people think that Nazism was defeated, actually, the Nazis themselves, even at Nuremberg, with those people who are on trial, if you go and read the transcripts of the Nuremberg trials, they talk about the 8 legs of the spider and the multi-year Reich. And they talk about not being done. They don't talk about defeated. They're not weeping on the stand begging for forgiveness. They're actually warning that stating that the war is not over. And of course, what was the result? If you look at the Second World War, the result was to take the leaders of the Nazis. Alan Dulles, former head of the CIA, protected all the Nazi leaders in Western Ukraine, which was the headquarters of the Nazi SS, and protected them from the Nuremberg trials. And what happened to these people? Many of them, the Red Cross provided them safe passage and gave them passports and brought them where? To the United States of America, where, let's see, the head of Nazi intelligence was one of the people that helped Alan Dulles set up the CIA. So we have, what we find is that, scratch the surface, there are Nazi leaders all across the United States government before the bodies of millions of Jewish people and, many others have even been buried in the concentration camps. Their leadership has been protected. And the world is celebrating the end of Nazism and the victory, over the Nazis, the same way they celebrated the end of communism. And instead, what we find today is that, we're still funding the Nazis. And where are they? They're in Ukraine. And they're not neo-Nazis. They're not new Nazis. They are the same Nazis. They're descendants of the actual SS who killed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian Jews, which, by the way, is all happening at the same time as we're separating the United States from its traditional ally, Israel, for many reasons. People can argue that they're justified or not justified, but the effect is the separation of a traditional ally. And this is not happening out of context. Right?
Yeah, no, and it's awful, too. It's absolutely awful and inexcusable because it's based on such, among the people, maybe not leaders, but among the people, it is based on such widespread ignorance, it defies description. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. It's not a reality. It's something that the Arabs created, the PLO created, the KGB created specifically to give them a pretext to continue their war against Israel. And they say that. I'm not saying that. That's a quote.
That's
from
correct. That comes straight from the PLO.
Palestine Liberation Organization. And so, and in both of those, in the Palestine, in the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, both they live under brutally oppressive, corrupt regimes that take every penny that the West gives them so they can live high off the hog while the people starve and their cars break down, and then they're indoctrinated to have their kids become suicide bombers and all of these.
I've seen it. I've witnessed it with my own eyes. I've witnessed both sides of it, where you can go to Gaza and people are living in poverty, but you walk past dealerships for Porsche and Ferrari and every luxury vehicle that you can possibly think of. And you're talking about trillions of dollars in Western aid that's been poured into that territory. And yet somehow the maternal mortality rates have gone down. The education rates have gone down. The average quality of life has gone down, and so on and so on. And now people will counter that and say, well, that's because they're fighting, for their freedom, and they're fighting against the great evil of Israel. And so, you have to sacrifice. But it's amazing. It's amazing how it's only the people that have to sacrifice and not the leaders. Let me ask you about something, though, just bringing it to today, because I just came back.
Can I say one thing first?
Yeah.
Most people don't know this either, that while the Nazis and the communists, the brown shirts and the red shirts were fighting in the street, the anti-fascist action, the anti-fascists were fighting the fascist brown shirts. They were all fighting and battling in the streets. Behind the scenes, until, and this was before the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This was in the early 30s, after Hitler took over. Behind the scenes, the Nazis and the communists were working together, because Nazism and communism is really a distinction without a difference. And they were working together, even to the point where the communists would say, well, this Soviet agent over here living in this part of Germany, you can round him up and kill him. They would give them, so that they would have the pretext of showing that the Nazis and the communists were really at odds with one another, until the reality of it became known to the world with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which stayed in force until Stalin tricked Hitler into invading Poland first. And that's where it's when Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union, and they were mortal enemies. But they're mortal enemies both from the same place. And in fact, fascism, as I'm sure you know, was created by Mussolini. And it was the idea that instead of having straight communism, where you confiscated everybody's everything and no longer allowed private business to operate. Instead, you would create a system where you would have businesses in cooperation with the government in public-private partnerships. Where have we heard that before?
Yeah, public-private partnerships, straight out of Barack Obama's mouth, straight from the UN and the World Economic Forum, the whole stakeholder capitalism, right?
Defined, yeah.
Yes, fascism, Nazism, socialism, Marxism, communism, they're all just variations of the same system of social control. And if you look at their platforms, none of them believe in private ownership of land or private ownership of businesses or free markets or, empowering the individual. And most importantly, none of them believe in God, right? They all believe in eradicating the church and eradicating faith and eradicating God because that they see as one of the most powerful threats to their system of control. Except with the Islamists, of course, you're allowed to, because with the Islamists, what they found is that it's such a powerful tool of control to act with the authority of God, so to speak, that it's too valuable for them to throw it out yet. Yeah. So, I mean, only so far, right? Because in the end, they'll throw it out there too.
They'll throw it out. Yep, they'll throw it out there too. And the Islamic leaders will reveal themselves to be who they really are. And those members of the Muslim community who are a nuisance will find themselves, along with the Antifa folks and all the other radical leftist lunatics that are annoying the heck out of everybody, lined up against a wall and shot.
Wasn't that famously what Yuri Bezmenov said? The other Soviet defector, right? Just such an absolutely brilliant man who outlined all of this. That's exactly what he said. These are the useful idiots who are just being used, whether they're the brown shirts, the black shirts, the Islamists, it really doesn't matter. Or even the pro-Palestinian mob, they're the ones, they'll be used now for a purpose, and then they'll be the first ones that'll be marched out, lined up against a wall and shot once they're no longer useful to the people in control.
That's right.
I want to say that words really do matter, right? When the PLO created the term, the concept of Palestinian statehood, that made everybody think about that land as belonging to the Palestinians because it was, by its inception and name, Palestinian. Of course, it doesn't matter that for hundreds of years before that, it was called Judea, which, if you still called it Judea today, then people wouldn't challenge the fact that the Jewish people have a right to be on that land, but change the name and suddenly everybody, has no ability to look back in time and in history, and yet they're an expert on everything.
Right. And then it's when the Romans defeated Israel, I think it was AD 70 or somewhere around there, or BC 70, I forget. But they renamed the area Palestine as an insult to the Jews because it was actually about the Philistines, which the Jews had, of course, defeated many years before with King David killing Goliath, and then the Jews defeating the Philistines. And the Philistines, interestingly enough, occupied part of Israel, which is actually a big part of it is the Gaza Strip. It was that area where they lived. So it's really kind of interesting, the whole thing. But it was meant as an insult to the Jews by the Romans who defeated them to call it Palestine.
And it served its purpose, that's for sure. If you bring it to today, the same way that you see all these different factions, whether they're, fascists or communists or Marxists, or now the buzzword, right, democratic socialists, they're all cut from the same cloth. In a similar way, it's the same for ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of these various groups in the Islamic world who are really just, if you look at it, Muslim Brotherhood and CARE, they're sort of the more political face. Of course, the Al-Qaedas of the world, they're the more militant face. But really, in the end, they're doing the same thing. They're fighting for supremacy in their piece of the pie, right? Because I interviewed, many times, a man who spent several years underground training to infiltrate the Islamic faction of the global cult, as he calls it. And that was very interesting to me because, of course, at the time, immediately after 9/11, we had this concept in the West that, well, this is our enemy, right? Islamic radical Islam is our enemy. What do you mean, the Islamic faction of the globalists? And then, of course, you realize, well, of course, there's an Islamic faction. There's a faction for every part of the world because it's truly global. And that's where the blue dimension comes into the red, green, blue axis. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. The globalists, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, they're all communists. And some of them may not know that they're fighting for communism led by the Soviet Union and Communist China through the Comintern, which still exists, but it's under a different name. You know this. The United Nations Charter was written by Alger Hiss, the most notorious Soviet agent in the United States that we know of. And he wrote it specifically advantageous to the Soviet Union, and the Soviets always considered it simply a foreign policy arm of their government. They always considered that. And now, so, as I write in my second Red Green Axis book, I have a whole chapter on the United Nations and how every single leader of the UN has been either a socialist or a communist from the beginning, every single one. And so, and then, of course, all the non-aligned countries, they are aligned right up with the Soviets, or at least definitely non-aligned against us. And so, and the World Economic Forum, I have a whole chapter about how it was created by a guy, Maurice Strong, or actually I think it was pronounced Strange, although it's spelled Strong. Maurice Strange was a very big behind-the-scenes mover and shaker in the United Nations, and he helped found the World Economic Forum in 1973, and Klaus Schwab calls him his great mentor and leader, and he died in 2015. But behind the scenes, he's been responsible for the 1992 Earth Summit, where we were all supposed to sign on to Agenda 21. He was behind the entire environmental movement that came out of the United Nations and
another
other
big scam.
Huh?
Another big scam for social control.
Another big scam for social control. Exactly right. But these are all communists. And Maurice Strong says, said himself, I'm a socialist in ideology and a capitalist in business. He was a very wealthy man. He was a billionaire Canadian who made money in oil, and then, like George Soros, began using it to, promote communism. And
pretty much like this guy, Hans-Borg Weiss, who is also involved, right? George Soros's billionaire Swiss banker.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, there's so many of them. I mean, you can't list them all. And many of the foundations that were created by capitalists, like the Ford Foundation, and all of those were founded for good reasons. But then radical leftists insinuated themselves onto the board of directors, and then they fired all the original founders. Edsel Ford, when he was thrown out of the boardroom by the rest of the board, went out screaming and yelling at them, calling them a bunch of XYZs. And but that's what's happened. And the Ford Foundation is one of the biggest movers and shakers behind the entire open borders agenda.
But didn't Ford also build kind of, Marxist villages in Latin America? They built like entire areas that were pretty much, Marxist enclaves.
Well, that's very interesting.
Around Ford plants, Ford motor plants. Yeah.
Huh. I did not know that.
If you take a look at what they've been building out that infrastructure, I don't know where it stands today, but certainly that's what they did, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
I did not know that.
But Jim, one thing to understand in terms, of the globalists, I mean, say that they're Marxists, really, in one sense, and capitalist, ideological Marxists, but, financial capitalists. Well, that's not really Marxism, is it? That's something else entirely, because none of these people are ideologically committed to Marxism. I mean, they're ideologically committed to themselves and to power and to a technocratic future. That is what I call the blue part of the axis.
Well, as I've written both in my Manufactured Crisis and my Karl Marx book, I call them entrepreneurial parasites, because really all they care about, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about the Islamic leaders or the leaders of Soviet Union or Russia or China or wherever else, to them, and really, Marx said so himself, Marxism isn't so much an ideology as it is a body of strategies to seize and hold power.
There you go.
And Lenin made that explicit. He said that explicitly. It is a body of strategies that will allow us to seize and hold power.
And who created Karl Marx? Who was behind him?
Gosh, he was a Christian, raised as a Christian, even though his family was Jewish. His father was a Jewish lawyer, and in Lutheran Germany, you couldn't practice law as a Jew, so he converted to Lutheranism, raised his son as a Christian, and in high school, Marx wrote beautiful Christian poetry. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's really beautiful. And I quote some of it in my book on Marx. But then he went off to college. And he fell in with, a crowd of very dark people. And he came out of it a changed person, like many of our children do after they go to college now. And it was not a good change. And, Marx, so many people don't know, he was a selfish, lazy slob who drank too much. He was a lecher. He impregnated his maid, and when was confronted about it, he said that it was his partner, Friedrich Engels, who did it. And Engels didn't want to embarrass Marx, so he claimed the kid as his own and didn't admit it was Marx's until he was on his deathbed. And Marx used to hang around waiting for relatives to die so he could find out what he would get in their wills. And he would send these letters to Engels saying, "Oh, Uncle so-and-so is just kicked off. I hope I can see, maybe I can get 1,000 thalers if he hasn't given it off to his maid, the old scoundrel," things like that. And two of his daughters and a son-in-law committed suicide. 3 of his young children died of malnutrition. And while his wife was looking around for a coffin for one of their kids, he hired what was described by a writer who actually was a pro-Marxist person. He said he hired what was a loutish, libidinous, and otherwise useless secretary because a man of his stature had to keep up appearances.
Didn't he end up at 10 Downing Street?
Huh?
Didn't he end up at 10 Downing Street? Yeah, where his research was funded by the Rothschilds, by Henry Rothschild, to create a system of social control. In fact, when you see social media, I just substitute socialist, and you pretty much have what it is, socialist media, socialist policies. Yeah. And you wonder how damaging this has been to the United States, taking our eye off the ball and letting this cancer continue to grow in U.S. society. Perhaps one of the greatest victories of the Marxists was making people think that McCarthy was a liar and a bad man. Because McCarthy actually, his legacy has been falsely rewritten, and whitewashed, and the Marxist infiltration of the United States has been whitewashed by Hollywood and many others. But in fact, McCarthy was trying to warn us, wasn't he?
He was. Yep, and there's a lot of suspicion about how he died as well. Yeah, no, he was trying to warn us, and he was absolutely right about almost all, if not every person he identified as a communist was in fact a communist. And those hearings were held not by him, or the hearings where he was lambasted by his enemies was a hearing that he called to interview people, and instead he got smeared by these people. And
well, I would encourage people to listen to those hearings, because when I listened to a bunch of them, I was amazed to see very, very senior, high-level people within the United States government, within the Department of Defense and at the Pentagon, who were sitting there on the floor of Congress saying, I am an avowed Marxist, and I'll be a Marxist till the day I die. And you're like, wait a minute, where was that in the movies?
Yeah.
Right? So,
Exactly.
but Jim, having said all of that, Russia today is not the same as it was before the collapse of the Soviet Union. I just came back from there, and people all over were talking about God and faith. There's a massive Christian revival that's taking place. The Russian Orthodox Church, which obviously predated communism in Russia, is having a huge revival. And so it just strikes me that even the traditional way that we view these things, even viewing Marxism today, it's more as a system of control that I find it most alarming. But what it is doing is really aligned with Islam. Well, you say using Islamic and political Islam as a cover, but then also the global part of it. What I see is that in spite of Donald Trump's election, in spite of people all across the world pushing back against this, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Milei in Argentina, Bukele in El Salvador, besides all these leaders and people increasingly pushing back against this, they're marching forward. I mean, they've bulldozed their way through the Amazon forest, and they're still having a huge summit about climate change that we know is completely and is an utter fallacy.
Utter nonsense.
Yeah, utter nonsense. We're in a CO2 drought, and every single one of us generates CO2 every time we breathe. You and I are doing it right now. And, and so this idea that this threat is defeated or on the back foot, how do you see the current situation?
Well, we definitely, we got a temporary reprieve from the growing momentum of the communists and socialists in this country under the 4 years of Joe Biden, who was definitely not elected legitimately. And I have a whole chapter in my book that goes through the many, many myriad ways the Democrats cheated. And
are still cheating, by the way.
And are still cheating, Yes, they still are cheating. And we have to really, I don't know what the Republican legislatures and what the Congress is doing. They got to get off their rear
Very
end.
little.
Yeah, it's almost inexplicable how they are like that. Maybe the same way when Reagan was elected as well.
Or maybe if a better way to put it is not enough. I don't know. I mean, it's not early days. We're quite far into it at this point. And I know there are millions of Americans who are just desperate to see more action. I always try to be conscious of what I don't know and give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But really, we're talking about a fight for our lives. We're in the fight of our lives right now. So I don't know how much grace you give in that fight. Because if you give too much and it's misplaced, the cost is the end of everything we know and love.
Well,
it's the end of our freedom.
Really, it's the end of the world. Because if the United States goes down, the rest of the world will go down with it. And that's the most amazing thing about communism and communists is, they're very good at destroying things and they're very good at seizing power, but they're no good at following up with anything that's of benefit to anybody. In fact, it's destructive to everybody. And so the thing is, they catch the golden goose, they kill us, and the whole world the entire world's economy depends on our economy. entire world's economy. When during the Great Depression, our GDP went down 25%. World industrial production went down 30%. If the communists took over here, our GDP would drop to near zero. What would that do to the rest of the world? We are not only the breadbasket and the consumers of the world, we're producers for the world. And so without that exchange, the entire world's going to die. And it's just astonishing to me that we've allowed it to go this far, and that there are so many people in our government that are either ignorant or are working on the other side because they think they somehow are going to benefit. And the thing that I forgot before that I was going to mention was one guy that I speak about both in my Manufacturing Crisis book and my Karl Marx book is Sergei Nechayev. Nobody's ever heard of him. He wrote the Revolutionary Catechism, which became the blueprint for communist revolution everywhere. It's a 3-page document, but if you read it, you will see where Antonio Gramsci got his idea for the Long March through the institutions. Nechayev codified that in one paragraph. He also included an order of execution for the different segments of society who would have to go once they had taken power. And the Soviet Union followed that almost to the T. I mean, the first group, of course, is people like you and me who are never going to give up, ever going to give in to those people.
That's right.
We have no usefulness to them at all. So we will be dragged
first in line. Yeah.
And then after they've managed to create enough chaos and terror, the people like Antifa and those kind of types, they don't want them in their country any more than we do. They will be lined up and shot. That's the second.
Yeah, they don't need them causing trouble.
He goes through this order of execution, and you're like, this is exactly right. And it's just like your friend said, the KGB. What was his name? Who you quoted?
Oh, Yuri Bezmenov?
Bezmenov, yeah. I mean, exactly the same thing. And he was notorious in his time. He was a leader of the Soviet or the Russian nihilist movement, and he was a hardcore anarchist, very violent. And Dostoevsky wrote a book called Demons, and the main character was inspired by Sergei Nechayev. And you've always heard the Democrat slogan is the ends justify the means. Mm-hmm. That was Sergei's slogan.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting to see all the parallels because, of course, Joseph Goebbels wrote about creating and controlling both sides of the narrative, right? And that's exactly what we've just described with the Islamists, the fascists, the Marxists. It's controlling all sides of the narrative. And then you look at what else did they do? They wanted to create the problem so that they can be the solution. Well, you're looking at that in the United States today, right? You see all these groups, Antifa and all the other affinity groups that are part of these networks, and they're creating all this. And it doesn't matter whatever they can use, they'll use it. And they're creating that because they want to use that instability and that social chaos in which to be the solution. And you see that with the defund the police movements and all of that. They don't care that they don't care that the murder rates go up, that the crime goes up, that companies are fleeing their states. They don't care because the end goal is not a thriving, happy, middle class with a productive population that's full of hope and has the American dream at their sails and is working hard, and through your own production you can become better and you can have a better life. They don't want that. That's not the goal. And it just seems so hard for people to wrap their head around the fact that we have people in positions of power in this country
that are that evil,
who really in their heart of hearts do not seek a thriving population, who do not seek the well-being of humanity, who do not believe in the United States of America or the American dream. They couldn't care less.
I point out in my book, I have a chapter in the book called "The War Against Black America." It's called weaponizing the poor, the war against Black America. And I point out that the communists had been targeting the Blacks since the 1920s.
Yes, because Lenin's emissary came over in the early, what was that, 1914 or 1918, whatever it was, I think came over in 1918, and he wrote a book about this. In fact, I have that book in my house.
Yeah. And so they've been at it since the beginning. And the last thing in the world they want is a happy, prosperous Black community. They want them isolated, angry, feeling oppressed, and because a happy, content population is of no value to them.
None.
They can't use them. They can't use them.
And by the way, look at what the Nazis did with their program. All the Germans that they targeted because their blood, Germans who were not Jewish, targeted because, they weren't pure enough or whatever. And look at what Margaret Sanger and the Democrats were doing, right? With Bill Gates's father. What were they doing? I have a very great friend, Angela Stanton King, who has taught me a lot about this. And all the people around her have taught me about this. And they figured out there's a reason you have all these abortion clinics in Black neighborhoods, and it's not for the benefit of the Black people.
No,
it's not. And it is by design. It's not an accident.
No,
these things don't just randomly pop up in these places. Somebody put them there, and there was actual thought that went into that. And what was that thought? It was nefarious, and it was divisive, and it was filled with hate.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. In my book, I talk about when the minimum wage was first proposed, Democrats were against the minimum wage. And why? Because they thought undesirables would be able to get a wage that they could live on. Yeah. And their undesirables were cripples and peoples that they couldn't use, and minorities. Gypsies, disabled
people, mentally disabled people, and so on. You know what? Their list, that nothing has changed, Jim, except that their definition of what is an undesirable has changed. If you're making me think of Hillary Clinton's speech about deplorables. Deplorables were the Hillary Clinton modern day progressive version of the Nazis' definition of undesirables, right? Who were gay people and Romani gypsies and all the disabled and so on. All the people who were somehow deficient in their eyes.
Anybody opposed to Hillary Clinton was a deplorable.
Well, in the end, wasn't that the same with the Nazis?
Yes. No. Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And and so let me ask you about this. How does immigration play into this? Because this is another part that you've written extensively about.
Okay. So, it's very interesting. We think of the open borders situation as being a recent phenomenon starting in 2019 or during the latter part of Trump administration and continuing or really going wild during Biden's administration. But actually, it all began with the 1965 Immigration Act, which was authored, interestingly enough, by a guy named Bert Corona, who was a leader in the California Communist Party. And Bert Corona was able to do that because his communists, believe it or not, had supported JFK's election campaign. And when they first had one of their first gatherings, Teddy Kennedy was a keynote speaker for their event. And so Teddy Kennedy got to know them, and Bert Corona and his communist group got the Congress to get rid of the Bracero program, which, as you recall, allowed temporary migrants to come from Mexico and the United States, work on the farms, make their money, and then go home when the agricultural season was over. It was a great program. Mm-hmm. He insisted that they get rid of that because they wanted to create a whole new system. And he and his cronies wrote the Immigration Act, which Teddy Kennedy pushed through Congress. Mm-hmm. And that opened the border, opened the United States to people from all over the world. Formerly, we had limited immigration to people from countries that either spoke English or at least shared our culture and our understanding of freedom and human rights, and not other groups that didn't. And they all had to come here and work. They had to, they weren't going to get on welfare when they got here. There was none of that. But Kennedy changed all that. He opened it up to the world, and he also increased the annual cap on immigration from, I think it was 20,000 to a much larger number. I don't know exactly what that was, but it grew and it grew, and then it expanded as we got the Refugee Act in 1980, as we got the diversity visa program in the 1990s, and all of these things were designed to bring in as many people from as many different diverse cultures as they possibly could, because, as you know, diversity is our strength, right? Well, no, diversity actually isn't our strength. Diversity is a great way to create chaos, because you get people from hundreds of different cultures who all clash with one another, who don't necessarily get along. And it's a great testimonial to capitalism that they've been able to get along because, making the almighty bucks trumps all of these other concerns which they had when they were in their home countries, because they couldn't do that.
So let me put it to you this way, Jim.
Let me just finish though.
Okay.
Because it was so Refugee Act, all of these things vastly increased legal immigration to where today we allow 1 million legal immigrants a year, supposedly for employment purposes. Only 15% come for employment purposes. That's 150,000. That's where we should cap legal immigration. We also allow in 70,000 communist Chinese every year, and we have for decades. We allow in 40,000 Russians, and all of these people, whether they want to or not, are agents of the home country, because they know that they have family back there, and if they don't do what a communist agent may suddenly walk up to them and say they have to do, they know that their family back home are essentially hostages to that regime. And so they have to do it. And so we have, Bill Gertz estimated between 25 and 40,000 communist Chinese agents themselves in this country. But practically every single Chinese person who's emigrated here has the potential to be an agent in one form or another, or to assist them in any of their, subversive activities if called upon to do so.
And those are just the Chinese who have come here legally that you're talking about, Jim, because there's plenty more. There's hundreds of thousands more who've come illegally. Yep. Including uniformed, trained members of the People's Liberation Army of China and special operations units, cyber hacking units. I mean, all kinds of people. Yep. I know a group of intelligence people who have been tracking those movements for years now, and then of course a lot of people who come as students get allowed to stay in the country. Then they marry and have roots here, and and we think that makes them completely American. But just look to the TV show The Americans, right, which showed how the Soviet Union infiltrated people as Americans, right? That these tactics they're not conspiracies. They're real tactics that were used very effectively, and they're old tactics. I mean, they're not even new.
Oh yeah, no. It's really funny. In my book, I quote the International Red Aid complaining that illegal immigrants weren't getting their rights, and they list a series of demands, which includes free entry to the United States from any country without documentation, a job, the ability to get jobs, and to not be deported. And the list goes on, and it sounds exactly what the Democratic Party says about all the illegal aliens here today. And they were trying to, at that time, infiltrate as many Soviet agents as they possibly could into the country to help destabilize it. But, also, I think a lot of the violence and a lot of the seemingly random killings that have been going on for many years, I think part of that is Spetsnaz. The Soviet
Special Operations Forces. Yeah. But what killings are you talking about? Because you can't just make a broad statement like that and not back it up, right?
Like some people who have been poisoned. And I think that a lot of these quote unquote lone shooters get recruited and they get trained and then they're unleashed.
But a lot of them get recruited and trained by the CIA. I mean, you don't need to look to Russian special operations. Yeah. Look right here at home, Jim. Look at MK Ultra. Look at all those programs. I know. Right? Look at the color revolution model. That comes not out of Russia. It comes right out of the U.S. playbook.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, but I'm willing to bet that U.S. playbook was written by communists.
Well,
American communists.
Anyway. that may be true, but if you look at a lot of these people, I mean, George Soros is not an ideological Marxist. That man couldn't care less about communism or Karl Marx. He's going to use whatever he can to get to where he wants to go, and he's got how many mini Soroses are there now because he's proliferated that model and that network all over the world. And so to me, I see Marxist tactics being used, and no doubt there are some ideological Marxists buried within that. But what you're looking at are people who don't believe in anything except themselves. Yeah. I mean, they seek power for the sake of power. And they talk about ascending to become gods, right? Yes. They talk about deeming who in humanity has a right to live. You and I will become useless eaters in their vision of the future, who are controlled digitally, right? I mean, because we'll all be chipped at birth. The technology already exists. And then we can be held in digital cyber prisons through geofencing and, denied all access to any form of anything in society, whether it's food or the ability to work, ability to get medical care, the ability to have children, whatever it is.
They'll have happening in China. Yeah.
Yeah, it's already happening in China. Give us a sense of what's going on there.
Well, I mean, the social credit system. I mean, they already have ratings in communist China, and your credit card is tied to those ratings. And so if you make somebody angry, you say the wrong thing about the regime, it depends on what it is. I couldn't say specific examples, but you can be prevented from travel. You go to use your credit card to buy a ticket to go to take a train to a different city, and you're denied. You're like, why was I denied? Well, you're denied, period.
They put lanyards around the kids, and, a child has to scan their lanyard to get on the school bus or to get on the train or to whatever it is. And it goes green, you're allowed to go to school. It goes red, you're not allowed. And by the way, you have no recourse. You can't address whatever the issue is. You don't have any say in that. Right? And they can deny your access to absolutely anything. And that's what the whole purpose of the digital ID, which is one step away from being sort of digitally identified.
Right. I know. That's one thing that we really have to oppose here and fight against here. But, I have a whole section, a chapter in my book, and it's called Why Do They Do It? And I go to that exact point. These people have no ideology. George Soros claimed in an interview that he was not recruited by the Soviet Union after World War II. I contend that he was recruited because George Soros isn't that smart, to be honest.
Well, he was working for the Nazis before that. What makes you think he stopped? I mean, he went on 60 Minutes with Steve Kroft and talked about how he didn't even regret that. In fact, he said he enjoyed it.
He didn't have a problem with it. No, his economic theories are ridiculous, and the things that the money that he's made by manipulating financial markets, I guarantee you, well, he was actually convicted of it in France as insider information, because there are little communist activists in the various financial markets, and he can get inside information on pretty much anything from anybody for anything. And that's how he got his start. That's how he built up his fortune. And then he was unleashed on the world. And I'm convinced he's the modern day version of the Occidental Petroleum's leader. Now I'm having
a senior moment.
Senior moment. And a book was written about him called Dossier, who was a Soviet agent that Reagan could never quite nail down, but he was a billionaire, and he was spending all of his money, promoting all of these radical programs and movements and ideas. And that's exactly what George Soros was created to do.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, Jim, if when people dug a little, there was a bit of Nazi gold behind George Soros. If you look at even the name of his first financial fund, it was the Double Eagle Fund, which was the symbol for the Nazi Alpine unit in a country like Albania. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those, when you look at a lot of these people, they don't strike you as being super intelligent on their own. How are they able to do things that nobody else can do? It's like Nancy Pelosi, right? It's not because she's so brilliant. It's because she has access to all that insider information that the average person is denied.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's absolutely.
Well, I think what we need from you, Jim, is we need a list of some of those books and those papers that you've mentioned that we can put on the website with this show, along with your book, so people can see the list of books that you have written. I know you've got your, the new one out right now, and let's see that. Manufactured Crisis, right, by James.
To End America.
Yep. The Award to End America by James Simpson. So I would urge people, go out and get Jim's new book. It's really worthwhile to understand the origins of what is happening to us right now, and also your book on Karl Marx, the red-green axis and the updated version. There's a lot there. I know the foreword in your book is written by Trevor Loudon. Yep. He's been on this show. He's also bold enough to go rogue with us, and another great mind who
Trevor,
was
looked forward to this book.
Oh yes, I read it.
Yeah.
It was he had a lot of good things to say about you.
To his first book as well, his First Enemies Within book. I wrote the foreword to that. We go back a long way. I've known Trevor since about 2008.
And I discovered you both watching a film years ago that really exposed the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE and the Democratic Socialists of America, and how that alliance was working to get people into power. And it's quite shocking, because a lot of people may hear this conversation and think, oh, okay, well, yeah, I get it, it matters, but we are safe in the United States. And what I want to remind people that there are 22 states in this country that are under Democratic control. Probably one or two rhinos controlling a few more. Yeah. And how many are needed to amend the Constitution? Well, you only need 2/3. Right. So if you think it's this is some sort of far-fetched conspiracy that's in the distance, and you don't have to be alert, and you don't have to pay attention, and you don't have to work on voter integrity and all these other issues that have brought us to this point, then I think you're dreaming. You're just dreaming.
As I make the point in my book that a lot of people think, well, it's over, we won. No, this is where the real fight begins. And in fact, my last chapter is what is called "What Is to Be Done," which is a takeoff on Lenin's book "What Is to Be Done," and it describes pages and pages and pages of things that we can do as individuals and as groups to help turn the ship around and save us from the country. But you know what I ask all people to do before they do anything else? I ask them to pray. I ask them to pray, because we need God's help. The reason we are in such bad shape, and it's partially our own fault and partially a deliberate strategy of the communists of the Frankfurt School, which I'm sure you're familiar with,
Yes,
And
who came over just before the Second World War and
yeah,
took over at Columbia University and
I mean,
instituted a policy of cultural Marxism.
yeah, cultural Marxism. They called it critical theory, critical race theory, critical legal theory, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, we have wandered as a nation so far away from belief in God. This is the consequence, because if we were all still, regular churchgoers and had a belief in God, people would not be behaving this way towards each other. They just wouldn't.
No, when you look at the reality of what we face, when you see the extent of, say, child trafficking, for example, nobody can look at the rape and torture and murder of children and not see that that is a completely godless
it's evil.
choice, right?
Absolutely evil. Demonic.
It's absolutely evil.
Demonic.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jim. I'm so glad that you raised that. I would urge people out there, if you have faith, then pray. I know there are many prayer warriors that follow me. I thank you so much for what you're doing. You know, we are big supporters on this show of GiveSendGo, who is a sponsor. And what we love about GiveSendGo, I mean, I love Heather and her brother, who are the founders. But what they do, Jim, is if you don't have money, you can still support people and you can fight for people and you can fight for this country with prayer. So, yes. Yep. So I would just urge everybody, I think that's great advice.
Yep. No, absolutely. And it's something that we all have to do. And we all have to realize, our own part in all these things, because really, and it happens. It's kind of a cyclical thing with countries. As they become more affluent, people become more relaxed and at ease, and they don't feel, well, maybe I'm not going to go to church on Sunday, or maybe I'm not, I'm happy the way I am. I don't need anything else. And that sort of naturally moves people away from a belief maybe in prayer, or even a belief in God. A lot of people think, well, I'm doing it my own. I don't need anybody else. And that's what, that's the road that ends badly. When we go down that road, we decide we can do all these things ourselves. We don't need God's help. We all become sadly mistaken. And the thing about the communists, the left, the socialists, whatever you want to call them, the globalists, they all believe that phrase that was first mentioned by the devil in the Garden of Evil: ye shall be as gods. Ye shall be as gods. That's what they want. That's
what they really believe in.
Yes, that's about that. If there's anything they believe in, that's it. They want power and wealth for themselves. They could care less
about any of us,
anything or anybody else. And oh my gosh, I mean, I quote Mao in the Karl Marx book, saying, the greatest morality I can have is devotion to my own happiness. I don't care. People in the world exist, but they are there only for me.
Wow.
It's amazing, the things that you hear from these people, but it's all true. And we have to, on the other hand, this is, we are the government. And we have to decide what kind of government we want. And we certainly don't want the kind of government the left envisions for us. And we're going to have to fight for it tooth and nail, because the fight has just begun. And as you have said, and you point out all the time in your fantastic show, we have a lot of fights on our hands, and we have a lot of things that we need to do. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick, but we have to do it. We have to stick with it for the future of our children, our children's children, future generations, and in fact, and as I said earlier, for the entire world.
Well, one of the things I always say, Jim, I always ask people, if you were going into battle and you could only choose two things, would it be all the money in the world? Would it be all the weapons? You go through the list. And I know what I would choose, and I know what we have, and it's two things. It's the truth. We have the truth, on our side,
We do.
and we have God. And those two things are more powerful than anything else. So I know there's a lot of people out there who are on the fence, a lot of people who maybe have lost their faith, and this is not meant to be lecturing anybody, but I think that any decent human being knows the difference between something that has God and something that is godless. So choose good. I believe in good. I know that good is stronger than evil. I believe in that so powerfully, and I have found such peace in my faith and in believing in God. It gives you so much peace. It doesn't relieve you of your responsibilities. There's a lot of work involved, right? In standing up for the right thing. You're going to take those hits. Just keep them coming. I don't care because I'm used to it now. I'm kind of good at dodging and weaving. And I know you are too. And what I appreciate, Jim, about your work is that you always go to the source.
Yeah.
And we learn from you. We learn about Mao. We learn about Marx. We learn about Lenin and Stalin and the globalists. We learn firsthand from them in their own words, which is the best way to learn.
The only way to really do it.
Only way to do it.
The book has unimpeachable sources, and if it's not true, I won't say it. If it's not true and I can't prove it's true, I won't say it. And
so
I
go out and get your copies.
In their own words.
Yeah, in their own words. That's it. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. I want to urge everybody, please, to like and share and subscribe. And if you can support our show, go to laralogan.com. There's a blue button to support us. Independent journalism is not free, especially firsthand reporting is definitely not free. We rely on you. We appreciate you. And as always, I want to thank you for being bold enough to go rogue with Lara Logan.